So, and it's already, yeah, it's 2. So we will start our talk now. I will start with a small introduction and a short message from the principal as well. And I would also like to formally introduce our speakers for today. A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to all our resource persons and all the participants who are joining us here today. Today we begin our 3 days webinar series on Mizo society and the English language. The Department of English, Government Kozol College, is ecstatic to be hosting an event that presents 6 very influential and distinguished Mizo personalities who have had their immense contributions to the Mizo community within and outside Mizoram in their respective fields. Our esteemed principal, Puarlarin Tuanga, and our head of department, Poo and Umananda Singh, have given us their warm regards and are sincerely appreciative of our resource persons and all the participants joining us today. They also apologize for not being able to join us and connect with us through video due to the problem of network instability in their area. And I think we do understand them because this is a recurring problem, especially for people outside Aizawl. However, I would like to read a very short message from the principal. Here we go. As we are about to begin the very first webinar conducted by Government Kozol College, I would like to thank all the resource persons and participants well in advance, mainly because it may not be quite as effective in the end. I would like to commend the efforts of all involved, particularly the head of the English department and Umananda Singh and his colleagues in the department. I hope that this 3 days webinar series would serve as a path breaker and an eye opener for academics, students, and freelancers in the way English is being taught and perceived across the spectrum of the society in Mizoram. Thank you. We thank our principal for sending his warm wishes for the success of this event. So to start off our program today, we have 2 very prominent professors in the academic field, Professor Margaret Sozama, who will be taking up the first session, and Professor Joy L K Patel, who will join us in the second session. They will both be talking on the topic Mizo ethnocentrism and the English language. However, the focus of their papers will be different. Particularly for those who know her personally, the name Professor Margaret Sozama instantly signals an aura of professionalism and high standard. She is a woman who continuously rises above stereotypes in academia, leaving behind an irreplaceable mark not just in the Department of English, but in Mizoram University as a whole. She held important offices of registrar and director of internal quality assurance cell for a good number of years, apart from her responsibilities as a teacher in the Department of English. She has several publications as a writer, as an editor, and also as a translator, and has worked with a number of renowned publishing houses like Sage, Katha, Oxford University Press, Sahitya Academy, Writers Workshop, to name a few. Apart from her notable research projects, she was also a member of the General Council of the Sahitya Academy in 2013 to 2017 and an associate at Indian Institute of Advanced Study during the years 2008 to 2011. Okay, although we would never run out of words to describe her achievements and contributions, I will end this introduction by saying that the participation of Professor Margaret Sozama in our event today truly shows her unending zeal and her resourcefulness, and how she's always willing to go beyond the call of duty even after her retirement. We are extremely thankful to have her with us and grace us. And we can't wait to hear her talk on our assigned topic. Another important announcement before I call on Professor Zama. Participants, as I've already mentioned before, participants are welcome to ask questions and clarifications at the end of the talk through the chat box, which where questions will go directly to the host. So your questions will not be available for other participants to see. And all the resource persons, we are hoping for all the resource persons to join us during the discussion session. And we hope that we also will be able to hear their viewpoints on your questions as well. And another recurring announcement that I will be making throughout the event is that a link for feedback form will be made available at the end of every second session, at the end of our discussion every day, especially for those who would like to receive e-certificate from us. Filling up of the feedback form is mandatory. So without further ado, I would now welcome Professor Margaret Sozama to give her talk on Mizo ethnocentrism and the English language. Ma'am, you can start your talk now.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Lalrin Sani. Sibaivek Ule to all participants. Very good afternoon to everyone. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Samba Sivarao. I just saw his name. So I'm happy that he's tuning in. Uh, that was almost 7 minutes of my time gone. So I am going to try to fit in everything as smoothly as I can because of, you know, the unreliability of power and things like that. So I wish to first thank Dr. Lalrin Chani and the Department of English, Government Khosal College, for organizing this webinar series on a subject that has become extremely relevant today. And of course, for inviting me to participate as one of the speakers. The selected allotted topic today, as already mentioned, is on Mizo ethnocentrism and the English language. I hope my talk will not take more than 30 minutes. So I shall move on as, quickly and clearly as possible from my notes. Although it's not a paper, these are notes that I have made. Uh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on, first of all, on the politics of language or the controversial language debate pertaining to Indian writing in English, because I feel this is very important to put things in perspective and to put things in context prior to and post India's independence, in order to not only provide a historical backdrop to my talk today, but to also help situate and put into context the many questions that have arisen in recent times in our own home state of Mizoram with regard to Mizo writers, what language should they be writing in, and so on and so forth, and the growing concerns for the preservation of the Mizo language and Mizo ethnocentrism. Now, the parameters given to me, which all the participants would have already read, I'll just read them out because they will be, I hope, addressed in the course of my talk. But your questions, I will request, may kindly be concentrated around these points. So these are the parameters. There are 5 of them that have been given to me, and I shall attempt to cover them within my allotted time, as I have said. Number 1 is how the English language affects the mindset of the Mizo. Then secondly, the growing concept of Mizo ethnocentrism. Thirdly, whether the English language challenges the idea or concept of Mizo ethnocentrism in Mizo society. Is English language threatening Mizo identity? And lastly, what can be done to promote a peaceful interaction between the English language and the perception of Mizo ethnocentrism? Of course, this assumes that there is a kind of push and pull over here, which we may not necessarily agree on, but I think I get the point of this. So this is the ambit within which we will be expecting, questions. Now, so with this, I shall just start on my talk on the points that I have made, which I hope will be able to link, which listeners will be able to link with what I have just read out. Uh, you know, this language issue in all its different parameters is not something that is unique to the Mizo condition today, to our society alone. In fact, it has happened everywhere. Uh, for the past decades, in fact, particularly with post-colonial societies and cultures that have emerged out of uh, colonization, not only of British colonization, but of other European powers and so on and so forth. So these are issues that are very relevant for us. And although I'll be going back in time a bit, this, as I said, is to put things in perspective so that listeners also will be able to place, their thoughts in context. Now, we all know that an international border or even state boundaries are very rigorous, but literary borders are not like that. They are porous and they are not well defined. They are, in fact, ill defined and has a colonial past. So, and we should know, as we have already studied, literatures and writers can flourish and are indeed flourishing between so many different literatures. Now, when we come to Indian history, although I'm not going into the nitty-gritty, but I think our history books, if those of us can kind of recall, the year 1800 was very crucial, particularly in the history of Indian writing in English, or as it was called, Anglian writing in English, and so on and so forth, its beginnings. Because, British domination by that time was supposed to, on Indian life, was supposed to have been completely established in the political, in the economic, in the social, in the cultural, uh, uh, ambit. Now, the introduction of English into the complex hierarchical language system of India was, of course, the most enduring part of this domination. We are going to see that. How and why the British wanted English to be part and parcel of their colonial expansion and their colonial governance. Because language is an effective tool. And so by 1800, as I said, there appeared all these assortment of texts in English, grammars, dictionaries, compendiums, all these things, translations of literary works, all meant to facilitate the process of British colonization in India. And those of us, as I said, who can recall our history lessons, the Battle of Plassey, which took place in 1757, and remember the name of Siraj-ud-Dawla, and the Battle of Buxar in 1764, Mir Kusam, these were fought and lost to the British. So that is why I am mentioning the year 1800 as an effective day. And by this time, the British had set about, rigorously set about mapping the intellectual, cultural, and historical dimensions of their newly attained territories, I would say. Now, the British interest in Indian languages, very briefly, which we have to touch upon, was because they wanted a medium of intercourse between the government, that is the British government, and its subjects, and between the natives of Europe who are to rule. Mind you, this is the colonial times, and the native inhabitants of India who are to obey. I am actually quoting from a pioneering Orientalist, Halhed. So, most unashamedly mentioning and going about the fact that natives of Europe are to rule and natives of India are to obey. Now, the Anglicist Orientalist controversy. Later on, I'll be talking about the language controversy of the 1960s because these are relevant to our talk and maybe the question hour later on. So, the Anglicist Orientalist controversy between those who favored Sanskrit and Persia as medium of instruction versus those who favored English as medium of instruction this controversy spanned almost, 4 decades, over 40 years, in fact. And this was also the time when Hindu College in Calcutta was established in 1870, later to be known as Presidency College. So all of this controversy, which took place for almost 40, 50 years, was resolved once and for all by the famous Thomas Babington Macaulay's Minutes on Education of uh, 1835. Anybody with a knowledge of the history of how English education came into India will be able to quote these lines. What he said there in the Minute on Education 1835 was, we must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us, that is the white man, the British, and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinion, in morals, and in intellect. This class of persons had in fact long been in the process of formation, consisted largely of the new urban elite. And in fact, I would like to say, in the context of our Mizo history, the CIs, or the circle interpreters, whom the Britishers took on when they came to rule our hills, they were in fact the ones who were the, as I said, the interpreters for them. So in a way, we can say that they also were groomed for the process to facilitate colonization. One important aspect of the changes taking place at this time in Indian society under colonization was that the colonized had begun to adopt the English language, but also to actually master it, which you can say is why English education in India today still flourishes, and many of the are of the opinion that this is one of the great, what shall we say, positive gifts that the British left behind. So they choose to use the English language as their chosen language of expression in their pioneering works of poetry, fiction, and so on and so forth, drama and things. And in some works of the English language was turned into the language of subversion. See, when you start mastering, we'll talk a bit more about all this language of subversion later on, where you can actually use it as a tool, as a medium and a tool to talk back, to hit back. And it was also seen by some as audacious acts of mimicry and self-assertion. At that time, such writers who dared to write in English were seen as copycats, and they were made fun of, and so on and so forth. In many ways, maybe that sense of thinking may not have totally left the Indian consciousness. Now, another consequence of colonial education was the transformation and gains it brought about in Indian languages. That is, not just those being written in English, but in the vernaculars. It was enriching it. So, of course, we are not going to talk about too much about the pros and cons here, but we have to see that although a language can at the same time be hated, but also be used, profitably. So writing about the spread of journalism in the 1840s, for example, this was actually the decade that saw the launch of several journals in the regional languages, particularly in Bengal, in Bengali, Telugu, Marathi, Urdu. Sisir Kumar Das writes in his History of Literature, Volume 7, he says that this conditioned their worldview and literary style to a great extent. So you see, we can see that this period in terms of hybridization and variety in literary writings of mutation and inevitable divides was brought about by colonization. There was a dilemma because you were gaining from something that you hated as well, from a language. Now things started to change as the decades moved on, and we are moving towards the national movement, Indian national movement for independence, the politics and language issues. So although there was all these misgivings about English in the 1870s and so on, prior to independence, we can say that it was mainly due to, this spirit of nationalism that had arisen, and what we can term the mother tongue syndrome. So the mother tongue syndrome and the language controversy of the 1960s. In the period after independence, the mother tongue syndrome quickly hardened into nativism that was often extreme, like later on I would like to mention some writers, and they certainly use very hard-hitting language against each other. Uh, like for example, given the context of those times, many who had education in England or who had the best education in English in India, who had begun writing their works in the English language, they totally rejected and turned their back on the English language and started writing in their in the vernacular, in their mother tongue, as a form of protest, as a form of patriotism, and maybe all of us, in a way, are familiar with names like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyaya. He was a Bengali writer who, in fact, in 1864 had written the first uh, novel, Raj Mohan's Wife, in English. But after that, he wrote in Bengali. Now, during this nationalistic period, writing in the mother tongue versus writing in English and so on became less urgent with the onset of a bigger issue, the necessity to forge a national language. Because India was about to get its independence, so many diverse languages, which was going to be the language to, have that status of national language. So it was considered that to draw a nation together, language is the most powerful tool. So common language for all. But there was so much controversy for this, whether it should be Hindi or Urdu or Hindustani. And it was not clear. Mahatma Gandhi had very clear views on this. He had written a little book in 1910, which many of us had to read, in college. This was called the Hind Swaraj. And over there, he had already written his, disdain for English. And he said it was to give millions a knowledge of English, which was to enslave them. So, the knowledge of English, according to him, enslaved. And the foundation that Macaulay laid of education has enslaved us. A universal language for India should be Hindi. So he was not for English per se. Now, the Hindi that Gandhi spoke about was actually Hindustani. It used to be spelled as D-O-O, Hindustani. And this was actually a mongrel language, the history books tell us, which was spoken by both the Hindus and Muslims across much of northern India at that time. Till the 1940s, the Hindi-Hindustani question was often bitterly debated. But of course, Gandhi lost out on this eventually, although he was strongly supported by Nehru. And he lost out to the Hindi of the Hindi Sahitya Sammelan, a literary institution established in 1910. Uh, it was this Hindi, it was Sanskrit based, it was purged of Urdu elements and written in the Devanagari script, which became enshrined in the constitution as the official language of the Union, Constitution of India. It has been said that when Mulk Raj Anand, but here, there's a kind of, Gandhi seems to contradict himself, but you will see the value or the virtue of what he's saying. Mulk Raj Anand was, the author of the famous novel Untouchable, which he wrote in 1935. And he asked Gandhi's opinion as whether he should continue to write exclusively in English. And Gandhi's response was, as usual, very frank. And he said, the purpose of writing is communication, isn't it? If so, say your say in whatever language that comes to hand. I think these are some of the things we should keep in mind, when we talk about Mizo writers also, in what language they would like to write. So it's to communicate. So you say your say, as Gandhiji said. So it was obvious that Gandhi's opposition was not to English per se, but to what it symbolized. That is political slavery and cultural degradation. English stood for the hated colonial past, which was shortly to be left behind, while the regional vernaculars were expected to have a bright future post-independence. Now, I believe it is relevant to touch on the bitter language debate and controversy of the 60s. Uh, the Constitution of 1950, that is the Indian Constitution, had provided for English to be used for official purposes by the government of India for the next 15 years, that is from, 1950. That is until 1965. This was to kind of, make happy the non-Hindi camp. Nehru, this was also made at Nehru's insistence, and he described Hindi as a national language, but was yet amongst the first politicians, shall we say, political leaders, to realize that the southern half of the country, which spoke Telugu, Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, they would never accept Hindi. So he realized this. So he fought for English to be included. When the year drew near for English, to cease as the official language, as one of the official language, the language agitation in India grew between the anti-English camp and the pro-English camp, thus dividing the nation. I believe this was a very, very turbulent time for those who had experienced it in that part of the country. Uh, the official language bill was brought to Parliament was brought before Parliament in 1963 and passed the same year, and it extended the constitutional recognition of English beyond a 15-year period. So they extended it, but up to when, that has been silent till date. States were given the liberty to use English or to discontinue and so on. So we'll leave this language controversy, but now we will see how important the issue of language is really. And but then we must also know that language is static, like our own lives, when it is in isolation, when you don't allow it to grow or to interact with other languages. But so even the Indian language or any other languages, as we shall see when we talk about global language, becomes dynamic in contact with other languages. And here in our case, with the the topic at hand, with contact with English. So, and yet, Indian writing in English post Indian independence continued to be seen as a historical aberration, as it were. Now, I think I better hurry because I still have some number of notes here, and I don't want to overtake my time too much. Uh, Now, one of the things we have to also think is, can a person think in one language and feel in a separate language? I think this is, one of the issues that many Indian writers had grappled with. And I think now in the Mizo context, probably many Mizo writers would be grappling with this, having a language of intellectual makeup and another for an emotional makeup. I wouldn't go too long into this, but let us keep this in mind, because many of the Indian writers used to talk about this also. Now, Bhal Chandra Namade, he is an Indian Marathi language writer who wrote his famous first novel in 1963, Kosla, which has been translated into English as Cocoon, published in 1997. Incidentally, I know the man personally during my stint as associate in the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla, because he was, a fellow there. So we used to have our breakfast together. And that was when I realized many of the things that I later came to uh, read about him, he definitely was extreme on his views, on language. He was what you would call a nativist, thorough nativist. And it was the Bombay-based poet Adil Jusawari Wali, another famous poet writing in English from Bombay, who talked about his fears that the qualities of racist arrogance, self-centeredness, and isolationism that he believed and saw were very much present in Nemadi's concept of nativism. Qualities of racist arrogance, self-centeredness, and isolation. I especially mention this because even as we are talking about our language today, and wanting to preserve the purity of Mizo language as far as possible, we must also avoid, we are actually treading a thin borderline in many ways regarding this. So Nevade believes that because English performs the supra-language function, it impoverishes the Indian mother tongues of regional languages. I don't know if I agree or with him or if you would, just because we feel that we can express ourselves better in another language, that is, say, English in this case, as the, supra language, which communicates more expressively and intuitively for us. I don't think it need be at the cost of, mother tongues of the regional languages, but to each his own over here. So we know that literature has to be vital, imaginative, and critical literature. All these things can be doomed if we isolate a language. Mizo literature also, per se, if we wanted to grow and become vital, imaginative, and also have the critical, component grow, we must avoid isolationism as far as possible. A regressive parochialism on the part of writers obsessed with such views can obstruct creative writings as well. It can obstruct, people from being creative. So we have to remember that. Now, the literature, as we said, should be inclusive, not exclusive. So it is more complex and not kind of homogeneous, it is everything and everything and anything in a way, literature, and everything should be able to fit in. It is not like a social group, and I think it would be unfair to equate it with elitism, just because somebody is writing in English or speaks in English, although he is a Mizo, then we start classifying or categorizing and making unfair judgments, and we equate it with elitism, or some kind of a different behavior, which is in a way unfair. And I think questions on that or discussions on that can come in. Now, over here, bilingualism also comes into the picture, because as we were saying, do you have an intellectual makeup in another language as you write, and an emotional one as you are expressing it? So bilingualism is very much widespread with many writers, and many writers also not only write in their own language, but they also actually translate in English as well. So like this, we have a number of writers, I need not mention their names. So bilingualism has this strong allegiance between two languages, that is my own language, my own mother tongue, and also the second language in which I would like to write in. Uh, in fact, Raja Rao, in his foreword in Kantapura, his famous novel Kantapura, published in 1938, he had famously said that we are all instinctively bilingual. I suppose he was speaking for people who had, background in English education. So in that way, and then, but this resentment towards writing in English by Indian writers has in a way not disappeared. It may have taken different nuances and different kinds of language, expressive language, shall we say, may have been used in the past. But, as recent as in 1997, when Arundhati Roy shot into fame with her novel, The God of Small Things, uh, it was none other than U R Anantha Murthy, none other than him, who disdainfully called it as writing for expert. Sorry, writing for export. Yeah. So, that she was writing for export. Well, that was how he saw it. But now, when we talk about, I am not rooting for English as such, but because English is one of the focus today, there is not much time left here. But I think we have to know that uh, when we talk about English as a global language, not necessarily belonging to the English anymore. Way back in the 90s, 50s, for example, researchers have said that to even theorize about English as a global language then was really, not, it was just a vague possibility, but today it is here to stay for now until the day comes when another language overtakes it. But I am not going to go into, the what goes into the makings of a global language and so on and so forth. But here I want to talk about language appropriation, where you take on a language. This is where, again, I want to express that we need not be afraid of bringing in other languages into our literatures or into our writings, because we can master a language other than our own as well. And we can all it can often be it is often used as a powerful tool as well. So this is one thing I want to mention very clearly. And at the same time, you can imagine, how sensitive we are to the way other people use our language. For example, a non-Mizo, they could misuse or abuse our language, we get offended. But in this deeply held feelings is now being questioned uh, with regard to language appropriation itself. Like I said just now, it was Salman Rushdie in a 1996 essay who said, English is no longer the property of the English. We have chutneyfied the language to such an extent that it is no longer theirs. It belongs to everyone who can master it, who speaks in it, who writes in it. So this is the way language has begun to be looked at today. So there, because of this, so many variations in English, sometimes called Englishes, has been, arising and emerging across the globe. And maybe Mizo English also will eventually emerge from our own land. You never know. For whatever purpose in this globalized or post-global period, it could do more good, bring in more advantages than we know. So it gains prominence. Why does a language gain prominence? All these things, we will not talk too much on that. But we know that language dominance is closely linked with economic, technological, and cultural power, as well as with military power in the past. Latin, for example, was spoken by the Romans, who were just a small group of people, but across Europe, Latin was being used simply because they were the ones who held the power, the Roman legionnaires, the army, they were the ones. So you see, it is to do with power as well. So globalization has indeed changed the status of English usage. And there is a growing awareness in English speaking communities and users of English language that at the same time, on the flip side, that they should break away from monolingual biases and the realization of the advantages of picking up other languages than their own. For example, if you see a tourist in Delhi or in Calcutta or here also, they sometimes you see them in railway stations with a book there about the local language that will teach them how to say yes, thank you, ask for directions. You know, that how shall we say, that chauvinistic attitude towards thinking of English as the language that paved their way into everything has slowly begun to be eroded, especially today in the age of post-globalization. And despite growing strains of racial, gender, and minority politics today, parallel indications and signs are present of a growing respect for other cultures and a greater readiness to engage in language learning belonging to others. I come to my last point where, we talk about linguistic death. The death of languages is a very sad and tragic thing because a whole history of a people gets lost, especially if it is unwritten, if it is oral, and it is predicted, that many more languages, uh, over 60,000, over 6,000 languages will die out within the next century. Can you imagine? So we hear a lot about endangered languages and so on and so forth. We won't talk about the statistics here. Uh, Now, why is this? Because language is not only the repository of a people, it is their very identity. Language is such a strong identity marker that no one wants to lose their language. Everyone wants to preserve their language. And as I said, there are those who will go to the extent of trying to keep it as pure as possible, so to say, unmixed and diluted or hybridized by other languages. But of course, we see the disadvantages of that. We have mentioned it. Now, excuse me. Uh, so these kind of issues that I'm talking now, and I'm bringing it to a close, these are, matters that have been discussed with extreme urgency today. And Mizoram, as I said, is no exception because language is to do with identity. And here, it should be remembered, though, that language, let me repeat myself, that language is dynamic, it is not static. At some point, for example, there is bound to enter loan words from elsewhere to fill up the lacunae felt in the mother tongue, maybe in the field of science, technology, or aesthetic literary terms, which can be viewed as enriching the vocabulary of a language. To what extent are we going to admit it? Or we know in the case of Mizo language, there are many prominent people in this field who have come up with a long list of words, I should say, which can be used for this and which can be used for that instead of bringing in, a foreign word into our language. But, language is to do with usage as well. We cannot suddenly bring in bag full of words and dump it on the table and say, from now on, we will have to use these words. We will have to, instead of using these, we have to, because language has to grow gradually. It is something to do with usage and acceptance. And it will be many decades have to move on before we can actually gauge whether it has been accepted and so on. So it's not an easy thing. So loan words sometimes will enter, and they could be seen, they should be also welcome. I believe they should be welcome as enriching our vocabulary as well. Now, English alone, let me tell you, as I have told my students time and again, English alone has borrowed from over 350 other languages. Can you imagine? 3/4 of it being from the Romance classic languages. So there you are. So, clearly this example of English does not denote, the loss or decline of a mother tongue just because we have borrowed from elsewhere. It is not convincing. But of course, it is very upsetting for language purists, for political reasons and whatever. So that is one thing. And I was talking about the rejection of English by in the post-colonial era by many nations and cultures in post-colonial era, although I have concentrated on Indian writing in English and the case of India, we know that this continues to happen elsewhere as well, like in countries like Africa, in Australia, and so on. And we have famous names like the Kenyan author Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has written about this first of all in Decolonizing the Mind in 1986. He used very, very strong arguments because for him language is definitely a identity marker there, and it is the universal symbol of this identity. So he makes very strong mention of this. And of course, I have also brought in those other names earlier. So with this, I think uh, I have crossed my time a bit. Of course, I did have in mind the 7-8 minutes that was taken in the beginning because of the introduction. So I hope the convener will forgive me. And with this, I'll say thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the insightful talk. Today we have a very diverse audience, and so I think it would be extremely interesting to have their viewpoints as well as their questions at the end of the session. And I'm sure we will be able to fit the rest of your arguments and the points that
Yeah.
you still want to make at the time of the discussion. And so now, as requested by our second speaker, we will move on to our second session and save the time for the discussion at the end of the second talk. As I've already mentioned, this is a request to the participants. Please ponder upon the number of issues that ma'am has raised in her talk, and please save your questions at the end of for the discussion time, which we will have at the end of the second session. I would now like to invite Professor Joy L K Patel to join us. I think she has muted her video and her audio. Okay, we have her. Before I invite her, I would like to open the second session with a very brief introduction. In 2017, Professor Joy L K Patel received the prestigious Mizo Award given by Vanglani newspaper, which is the most widely circulated newspaper in Mizoram, for her achievements in academic. It is apparent that this short introduction will not do justice to the name she has made for herself as an excellent academic and a prolific writer. Dr. Joy L K Patel is currently a professor of history at the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has a doctorate in history from the same university, as well as a doctorate in social and cultural anthropology from the University of Oxford, UK. At JNU, she teaches courses related to the history of Christianity in Asia in the 16th and 17th centuries and gender and society in medieval India. I would not go on with her research interest because I think I will be taking up too much time. But just another thing that I would like to mention is that Dr. Patwal's recent publication, which is Being Mizo Identity and Belonging in Northeast India, was awarded the Sneh Mahajan Prize for the best book in 2012 to 14 in modern Indian history by Indian History Congress. So I would just like to add that Professor Joy L K Patel has made Mizo history accessible to the world through her explorations and
Right.
research of historical resources on Mizoram, which is both preserved through writing and visual images, thereby clearing a number of misunderstandings and myths that was largely shaped by the earlier British understanding of the Mizo society. Although many is left unsaid, in order to save more time for her, I will now invite Professor Joy L K Patel to start her talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Rinchani, for the generous introduction. And I also want to thank the college, the principal, and your head of department for inviting me to be a participant in this talk. My colleagues, my co-panelists who spoke today, Professor Zama and the others who are going to be coming tomorrow, are, as you have already mentioned, very distinguished, and they're also much more aware of the situation in Mizoram, much more than I am, since I've been out of Mizoram for many years now. And I'm sure that, they have much better insights to give with regard to the topic that you have set out for us. But as a historian and maybe a bit of an anthropologist, I'll also try and add my bit with regard to this topic. Now, as was mentioned, the topic today is Mizo ethnocentrism and, and the English language. And you have, or the department, you have asked me to essentially speak on Christianity and its the impact of Christianity. Well, I have paraphrased it this way. There are many sort of points that you have laid out for me, and I have paraphrased it in this manner, and I will try and speak on these aspects. I've called it the impact of Christianity on Mizo culture and its implications on our relationship with English and English learning. So I will try and dwell on these topics. You've asked me to, talk a lot about um, how do we define Mizo identity in contemporary Mizo society? Is promoting the English language detrimental to native languages of Mizoram and things like that. So they're a bit, the topics are diverse, but I'll try and bring them all together as much as possible through this sort of topic that I have delineated for ourselves today. The first thing I want to start off, also I just have a few points here and there. I don't have anything written. So I hope I'll be able to sort of get people's attention. And as you all know, speaking in webinars is quite a difficult thing because we don't see the subjects, and so it's like, the audience, it's very difficult to sort of know how to communicate, and I'm still not very much used to it, but anyway, we'll try and learn along the way as well. So I want to start off by a proposition, which is that that the Mizos are reluctant to speak in English. I don't know whether you will agree with me or not on that, but largely I think we have a great reluctance to speak in English. And the other question is, of course, should we be using English more commonly than we are at the moment? So those are some of the questions. And then why are we reluctant to speak? If we are reluctant to speak in English, why are we reluctant to speak in English? What is our relationship with the language? I think these are some very crucial issues. And of course, in more recent times, English is also getting competition from other languages. For instance, we know that there is a strong push towards Hindi in the region as well. So there's competition for for the popularization of Hindi. And that is essentially a state sort of initiative as well, and also a cultural initiative, I suppose, as well. So there is that as well. But of course, we also know, for instance, that in Mizoram, many people want to learn Korean. So there's a competition from Korean as well. And of course, there's competition from maybe other local languages as well. So English is also facing a lot of competition from from other languages today in Mizoram. So, but anyway, while we are focused on English, there is some kind of thing disturbance. I can hear. Yeah. Can you mute that?
Yeah, I'm searching for the participant who is not muting their audio. Participants, this is a request to all the participants to please mute your audio.
Okay.
Okay, is it
better? Yeah, it's
is it
better
okay
now.
now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so within this, I mean, I just sort of set out the context in which we're going to be talking talking about English and the Mizo sort of relationship with the language. I'm also grateful to Professor Zama for highlighting for us the context of English learning in India as a whole, and I'm going to kind of bring that context within the context of Mizoram today. So when we talk about the reluctance of Mizos to speak in English, it's often related to the arrival of Christianity in Mizoram. Very often, people haven't come across it in readings per se or in writings per se, but I've heard people articulate it orally, saying that it's because of the missionaries. You know, our reluctance to speak in English is because of the missionaries, because we look up to the missionaries and we have some kind of fear of the English language as a result of that. So sometimes I don't know whether whether you think in a similar vein, but I've heard people say that as well. And I think it was Reverend Minga from Lunglei who once mentioned that to me when in an oral conversation, saying that, for instance, um, the Welsh were much more open than the English missionaries. So people in North Mizoram, for instance, have a different relationship with the language compared to those in the South. I don't know whether this is true or not, but he made that remark a long time ago as well. So the missionaries sometimes are blamed for our sort of difficult relationship that we have with English. Maybe if psychiatrists or psychoanalysts were to think about it, people could argue that in our sort of appreciation and sort of almost idolization of the missionaries, in a way that has sort of come to haunt us by our fear of the language as well. Okay, so that is some kind of, I don't particularly believe in it, but that is the kind of issue that people have often spoken about. Okay, so I think it's important to therefore understand what is the role of missionaries in the role of missionaries in understanding. The role of missionaries in the making of the Mizo identity. I think it's a very important question that we must address. We all know, for instance, that the missionaries came in the late 19th century, and by the 1950s and 1960s, you know, most Mizos were Christian, and so that is, and we know that there were Presbyterian missionaries and Baptist missionaries, and we know that many other smaller groups came in as well, like the Salvation Army, the Roman Catholics, Seventh-day Adventists, and things like that. So in Mizoram, the Christian experience, in a way, is not as homogeneous as we think. It is quite a heterogeneous Christian experience with different denominations coming in and sort of making the experience a lot more diverse than we actually acknowledge it. So I think that is something that we need to bear in mind in the first instance. Now, the question therefore is, whether 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 Christianity destroyed Mizo culture or not. Now, this is a take that many people have taken in the past, whether it is in Mizoram or whether it's in the rest of the country, whether it's in Africa or the other places where colonialism has brought in where colonialism has brought in has Christianity has come along with colonialism. There is a sort of tendency to think that Christianity has destroyed local cultures. Uh, uh, One of the and so the question that we need to pose before us is to suggest it whether we can use the word destroy, whether we can use the word destroyed local cultures. And um, the thing we need to keep in mind when trying to understand that is the fact that Christianity, of course, did not come on its own, especially, I mean, there could have been places where Christianity, like for instance in Africa, Dr. Livingstone, he went much earlier than, if I'm not mistaken, the colonial state. But in places like Mizoram, of course, colonialism came in and then the missionaries followed soon after. So we have to recognize that, whatever changes came in Mizo society was not merely the change brought in by Christianity, but it is what academics and scholars have called colonial modernity. So it is the modernity that colonialism has brought into the region, which changed societies. So at one level, you could say that how shall I put it? Even if colonialism did not bring in Christianity, or even if the missionaries did not come in with and bring in Christianity, Mizo society would have changed because of colonialism. I think everyone would be agreed on that. Okay, so what I'm trying to suggest here is also that colonialism and Christianity are two different things. They are not one and the same thing. And we also know, for instance, that um, uh, 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 for instance, that the apparatus of the state, and everything associated with the new governance brought in a new culture. And at one level, people like the Comoros, for instance, in the case of South Africa, have mentioned that Christianity facilitated the establishment of this colonial modernity, by providing education, by making people recruitable to become what we may call the bureaucracy, for instance, or the Babu class. Christianity, in a way, facilitated the establishment of colonialism and colonial modernity. While they are two different things, you cannot deny the fact that Christianity facilitated the establishment of colonialism. Okay, so therefore we have to understand the context in which Christianity came into the region. The other thing that I want to talk about is, of course, that so ever since, I mean, Professor Zama has already spoken about Mahatma Gandhi and his relationship with the English language, and from what I gathered from the talk, he felt that English is, there should not be cultural value attached to the language, but there should be an instrumental use of the language, right? So that is what she said with regard to the language. But many in the Indian national movement were quite against the contribution of missionaries. Missionaries have always been thought of as I said earlier, destroying local cultures and local ethos, local values. And this has also continued in the post-colonial writing. So I see that a lot of scholars, a lot of academics in Mizoram also today taking a post-colonial stance, and they talk about the negative impact of Christianity on indigenous cultures. I was just for the sake of this presentation, I was looking at some of the statements that have been made, and I shall try and, I don't know whether I'll be able to do it, but let me try and share my screen, and I've picked out some, okay, let's see. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing. So if I could be, if I can share my screen.
Just wait a second, ma'am. I will. Okay, I think I have enabled the screen sharing option.
Okay. Okay, there it is.
Another participant who is not.
Okay, can you see it? Hello, can you see it?
A second, ma'am. Yes, it's visible.
Okay, it's visible, right? I can't see whether you can see or not. So, okay. So, what does this thing? This is most post-colonial writers will, you know, have this kind of opinion about missionaries, which is that, what does it say here? Where is it? So they were the chief social agents, okay? And they made available the benefits of their technical skills. They brought in a superior civilization and its religion, Christianity, and it brought about a denigration of African culture and spirituality. Okay, so they said this is in the case of Africa, and I've put the quote down. I mean, I put the source down there, and it says Africans began a process of cultural reorientation based on the model of African of Western materialism. I'll just go to another quote here. It says, "White man's burden." We have all heard that. Civilization, Christianity, and commerce. These were the three C's that colonialism brought. And as you say, it says out here in the case of Africa, it devastated traditional African societies and economies. Now, what I want to say, and what I want to, and you know, some of you may have heard, I mean, I think most of you are from the English department, so you may have heard of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, where this particular novel, which I mean, it is a fascinating novel, and I was really touched when I read this a long time ago. And this is one of those early post-colonial sort of novels that, you know, sort of in his criticism of the missionary and the colonial intervention, he brings out the, you know, validity of the life in Nigeria, okay, in tribal Nigeria. So he sort of empathizes with the pre-colonial society. So what I'm trying to say here is that very often in our attitude to Christian missionaries, we tend to take this what do you call it? This framework of suggesting that missionaries and colonialism destroyed totally the traditional societies that we were all a part of. But I think what I'm trying to say is that I think we need to nuance this understanding. This is not to suggest that things did not change, things did not get transformed, but I think we need to nuance much more the understanding of the role of missionaries, the role of colonialism in the establishment of the Mizo identity. And these are certain, and I want to focus on certain aspects. Now, let me just escape for the moment. I want to just go back to saying a few things about nuancing this understanding. First of all, we have to realize, for instance, that, you know, the colonial state and the missionaries do not always act together. So we need to remember that. So therefore, what I'm, the missionaries and the state did not always act as one coherent body. In the case of Mizoram, a very famous example is that of, Peter Fraser and the boy controversy. When Peter Fraser was in favor of abolishing slavery, the state itself was against that. And so Peter Fraser himself was expelled out of the then Lushai Hills. So, there is antagonism that is taking place between the missionaries and the state. That's one aspect we must bear in mind. The second thing that we need to understand in this nuancing of the understanding is that, we need to see how did the people of the period experience this process of colonial modernity. How did the people of the period experience the process of colonial modernity? And I think this is crucial because very often, like I said, we either say the missionaries did all good or we say the missionaries did all bad. And how did the people of the time actually see the process of this transformation that was happening in Mizoram, in the Lushai Hills in the early 20th century? And I think we as Mizos are very fortunate that we have this journal called Mizo Le Vai Tanzinbu, and it's, whenever I read it, I find it extremely fascinating of the kind of topics that the Mizos were engaging in. So I was just looking at this September 1907 issue, and there are so many articles there. And throughout the Mizo Levy from 1902, 1903 till the 40s, you have this engagement that the Mizos are having with the colonial state, with Christianity. So I just want to see the different kinds of reactions of the people of the period with Christianity. Okay, can you see this slide, the one that I have put on?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Okay. So this is Dala, who wrote, I've put the reference up there. And here he's talking about, I basically want to go to the last phrase, which is a sentence, which is that all peoples of the world, all nations of the world can consider themselves as brothers, or as unau, as in siblings. So one of the what do you call it? One of the what do you call it? To the Mizos of that period, it was fascinating that they could call people all around the world because of the adoption of Christianity, because of the fact that they recognize that everybody is made by the same creator. And I'm not sure whether he mentions Adam here, but I think in other places he mentions Adam. So he says that all of us are one family. The whole wide world is one family. So one of the reactions to, or the reactions to the Christian missionaries is that of wonder at the fact that people all around the world can be regarded as belonging to one category. Okay. Now there is, of course, here another reaction to the missionaries, okay, by Kovel Thanga, that is written here, which is he's saying that there is a lot of tussle that is taking place between the Christians and the non-Christians. So he's so there is some people are being expelled out of these villages because they are being regarded as Christian. Now the other the other reaction here that we see is that of Rohning Liana. And what does Rohning Liana say? He's saying that he's fascinated because of the new things that are introduced and the importance of learning it all. So he was not in the previous slide that we saw. There were definitely some people who were against the new things that were coming into the region. But in this case, Rohing Liana here, written in 1907. He is fascinated by the new things that are introduced, especially teaching and learning and things like that. And he says that, and he talks about the importance of learning. Okay, so that is another kind of reaction that we're getting to the missionaries. The last and final slide that I want to show is also of this, that he says that in Mizoram, Zwachina is the name of the person. I don't know whether there was a misspelling at that point of time, but he says that there is a disrespect shown to those who want to go to school. Okay, so basically what we're trying to say is that here is that, you know, when Christianity came or when colonialism came, it was not as if everybody accepted this religion or this new form of governance wholeheartedly. So Christianity in Mizoram comes after a lot of struggle. In our writing of church history or Christian history, we often don't see the voices of dissension, you know. And so we think that it is an easy adoption that comes in. But we must realize that many people at different points of time were struggling with how to deal with this new thing that was coming into this particular region. So the transformation that comes into Mizoram, this is the point that I want to emphasize. The transformation that comes into Mizoram is after a lot of negotiation. And we see this constantly happening in Mizo Levi. In an article that I wrote on clothing, for instance, you know, and how the Mizos were changing to you know, Western forms of clothing, especially the men. It's quite interesting that there's a lot of talk about men changing their clothing. Okay, not so much women. Women come in later in the 50s and the 60s, but earlier on it was men's clothing that they were talking. And there is a constant friction about whether to wear these modern forms of clothing or not, who can wear it and things like that. So anything that happens in Mizoram, in the Lushai Hills at that point of time, this change and this transformation is something that came out of friction, came out of negotiation. And why is this understanding important? It is important for us to recognize that because in that we see agency. So very often we often think of the missionary presence as something that is an imposition from above, which we just accepted because we appreciated it all, but that is not the case. I think we have to understand that the presence of the missionaries and the colonialism is out of a sense of negotiation. So whatever culture we adapt today, whatever culture we adopt today, is not just acceptance, but it is constant negotiation that is taking place. And especially in Mizoram, because of the formation of committees, for instance, in the church. And from very early on, you know that we had Mizo pastors, you know that the church assembly and people like that had lots of Mizos. Mizos had a very important role in defining the kind of Christianity we adopted. Okay, so if some of you have read my book, Being Mizo, when I talk about missionaries, some of the missionaries were saying that they have no way of controlling the spirituality of the Mizos because the missionaries were saying this. The missionaries was like, for instance, we all know the phenomenon of Harna or revival in Mizoram. And I think it was Reverend Mendes who said that when we suggest anything else, people suggest that we are not spiritual. So therefore, we cannot say anything with regard to this harna that is taking place. So what does that suggest? It suggests that Mizos were expressing agency to the way they were adopting Christianity, and it is not just some foreigner coming from abroad and us just accepting it. So that's why the Mizo Christianity that we also have is a very vernacular or a very local kind of Christianity, which while in theology and while in doctrine, it may be similar to to mainline church orthodox doctrine, at the same time in its practice it is a very vernacular form, it is a very localized form. And so I think this is an understanding that we need to have, you know, because it's very easy for us to just say that everything that the mission, you know, there is very often a denial of the missionary sort of intervention, because we think that it is not all, it has not been an imposition. It is a religion that has emerged out of a belief that has emerged out of our own intervention, out of our own agency and our own understanding of who God is. And if you look at the Hartna or the revivals, it is a clear change in the way that Mizos are articulating their own understanding of God and the theology of God. Okay, so that is one point that I think I've taken too much of your time before I can get to the main point as well. So, of course, so let's just go back to, of course, colonialism. I mean, in my book, if people are interested, can also read about how it territorialized identity. You know, a fixed territorial identity is what colonialism brought in, and I won't get into that. So, so it is, of course, the missionaries and that who came and taught us English. But we have to remember, of course, that, you know, English medium schools, of course, I was told just earlier, when I was asking people and inquiring, they said that the first English medium school was the Catholic school Mary Mount, and that was as late as the 1960s. And from the 1980s onwards is when we begin to have you know, English medium schools as we know it today. And prior to that, all our education, if you look at all the early textbooks that we had, they were all in Mizo. So it's not as if the missionaries imposed the English language on us. They were very, very careful that, and of course, to develop Mizo as a language. And F.S. Downes, in one of his works, he says that identity in Mizoram, not in Mizoram, sorry, in the Northeast, is a contribution of the missionaries, in the sense of when language was formalized. Okay, so when I mean, I won't get into the details of orality, its importance, and the importance of a literate culture. And a literate culture, as you know, has many advantages. So one of the what do you call it? The implications of that is, of course, of formal literate. Literacy is, of course, the fact of the creation of an identity, of a much more homogeneous identity in that sense. Okay, so language crystallizes an identity. That is one thing that yeah, we need to point out. And then, of course, so why is it then that we have a complicated relationship with the English language? Why is it that we have such a complicated? So can we blame the missionaries? For me, I don't think I can blame the missionaries for our inability to speak the language. Is it therefore then, how shall I put it? You know, is it our educational policy? Is it our language learning? Is it our general attitude to life? I mean, of course, I'm sure other speakers will talk about, is it important to learn English at all? Okay, I won't get into that. But the question is, why then are we so reluctant to speak the English language? And I was also thinking, for instance, other cultures that were supported, where missionaries came in, like for instance, Nagaland, among the Khasis. There is a much greater facility to, or even in places like Churachandpur or in the Tangkhul Naga, Manipur Naga dominated areas. English is, people from these regions are much more fluent and much more easy with the language, I think, in comparison to the Mizos. And even in, you know, things like uh, uh, JNU, for instance, you know, we find that a lot of students who come to JNU from Mizoram are students who have studied outside and not from Mizoram per se, you know, and whereas students who come from Nagaland have studied in Nagaland and they come to Mizo, which means that they have a better access to the English language. So I think I would actually think uh, more in terms of what can we do in our education policy to help us with facilitating you know, the use of English language amongst us. We need to, I think, as a community, we need to have much more um, uh, what do you call it, a better sense of self, let's put it that way, as a community identity. And we need to have a better understanding of who we are. And that, I think, will enable us to negotiate better in learning other languages as well. So I think two or three things that I need to think about, and I'm sure that there are policy makers who will be listening in as well at some point, which is that we really, I think, need to focus on English education in our, or not so much English education, but speaking in English. We don't really need to do education in English, I think, but speaking in English is extremely crucial for us to get on ahead in life. And of course, under present circumstances, I think there is, the government is, you know, pulling us back towards learning regional languages, which is also very important. But I think English is also very important, and we have to have a greater push from the government to be learning this language. And the second thing, of course, is that we need to have a fresh attitude towards learning language. It's all a matter of attitude. I was brought up in Pune, and it's interesting. We had English, Hindi, and Marathi as language to learn, and I just could not learn Marathi. I did a bit of Hindi, I learned English, but somehow my attitude was not right in learning Marathi. So till today, I regret that, you know, that I could not learn Marathi as much as I should have. So it's a matter of attitude. It's a matter of how we understand languages. And we need to change that framework of learning of learning another language. Okay, and I think all of us have a similar attitude towards English as well. So I think those are some of the points that I will raise, and perhaps maybe in the course of the discussion, I think I've already spent more than my 30 minutes, so I shall stop here for the moment, and then we can go on to a time of question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I will just unmute Professor Margaret. I think she's still there with us. So we will start our discussion time. Thank you, ma'am, for the very lucid and concise talk. And because of the limitation of time, I think I did not thank Professor Margaret enough. So I would like to take this time again to thank both of our speakers for their profound and enlightening talk. And I think for the participants as well, it is evident to see how much preparation was done for us to deliver such impressive talks. So we will now move on to our discussion time. I have a question both for our speakers here. I think I will ask Professor Margaret first, if it is okay with Professor Joy. So yeah, we will have Professor Margaret Swazama to address this question. A lot of us still confuse official language with national language, and this has led to many debates before. Is this confusion still prevalent today? I think Professor Joy can also address this, but I would first like to invite Professor Margaret to address this question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Am I okay? Can you hear?
Yes, ma'am.
I have yeah, you can hear, please, because I was having problems. Yeah. Could you just repeat the question because my connection was unstable at
Yeah,
that
sure,
time?
ma'am. A lot of us still confuse official language with national language, and this has led to many debates before. Is this confusion still prevalent today? This is a question posed by Laldin Pui.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah. Uh, I don't know about how prevalent it is with the rest of India, but it may be, uh, there may be some dilemmas involved here with us here in our own region and in our own home state because there are so many other factors that we start roping in, of identity, of our politicized kind of approach to things. I hope that doesn't sound like, I'm putting down certain viewpoints, but I think this is why it is seen still as something that is, unclear here in our part of the world. If that answers the question, because for me personally, I am not too involved with debates on this, but I do feel that the confusion arises because of this. That is, that we bring in and rope in so many other considerations when we look at what we mean by national language and also by the official language. Yeah,
Professor Joy, do you have anything to add on that question?
yeah, I think she can
I
answer.
was just checking, I mean, I wasn't sure of the actual figures, so I was just checking the figures on the internet. And um, according to the Indian Constitution, there is no national language in our country. We have two official languages, which is Hindi and English, and 22 scheduled languages. So there is no such thing as a national language. But we have two official languages, which is English and Hindi. So which basically means that for communication, for official communication and things like that, it is English and Hindi, and over and above that there are 22 scheduled languages. So
Two.
that is something that we need to bear in mind.
Okay, let me go on
And
to.
yeah,
Okay,
and
ma'am. Yeah, please go.
if I may add very briefly, there has been strong move from many quarters about wanting, requesting authorities and in fact making a stand with regard to adding Mizo as one of the, scheduled languages as well. So that we must be very clear on that. Yeah, that it does not mean that we are pushing it to be a national language. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I think I can move on to the next question. I hope it is clear for the participant who asked the question. The next question, for particularly for Professor Joy, but for which we will also be inviting Professor Zama again, is what about the rejection of using Mizo poetic words or lyrics for the composing and or slash or translation of hymns or devotional songs in the initial stages of Christianity among the Mizos? What about the rejection of using Mizo poetic words or lyrics for the composing or translation of hymns or devotional songs in the initial stages of Christianity among the Mizos? And there is another set of questions, but I think we can address this question first. I hope it is clear.
Yeah, okay. um, One of the things, I mean, I'm um, yeah. So conversion, I think it's related to conversion and my sort of, my take that the Mizos had agency and things like that. So it is in that context that the question is being posed. So I think we need to realize that um, when conversion takes place or when the missionary is converted, words words have a cultural resonance. you know. So words have a cultural resonance, and which over time can be secularized. Okay, so I don't know whether you I mean you understand what I'm trying to say. I mean, I don't know whether I'm conveying it clearly enough. Words have a cultural resonance which can be secularized after a point of time. So for instance, when people convert, for instance, uh, certain words may be things that uh, that that do not allow for a how should I put it, that and that make you that makes it resonant with the pre-Christian past, you know, that resonates with the pre-Christian past. And so very often I've heard converts myself don't want to associate with anything that is pre-Christian because it is too close to what they believed before, you know. Like for instance, uh, I used to know a Hindu convert to Christianity, and he never wanted to say the word namaste. Okay, for us, we use it. I mean, I use it very regularly when I say namaste, but he never wanted to use the word. He was a Hindu Brahmin convert. He never wanted to use the word namaste because he said it means in Sanskrit, I worship the God in you. Now, for us, we have secularized it. We just use namaste. But for him, who is a Hindu and a Brahmin at that, he said namaste means something completely different. So he would never use the word namaste. Okay, so it has a cultural resonance. And so for us, it's okay. So there, I do believe that that those are some of the reasons why people in the past would not want to adopt languages. People
Yeah,
perhaps do
just
not
muted.
want to use those words. Okay, so so that is one. Like for instance, my mother, she would never want to tell me stories, Mizo stories. Nowadays people will say, why don't you tell Mizo stories and things like that, but she said that's you know, things of the past. And she was a much older woman, so in her time, talking about Mizo stories like myths and things like that, which spoke about spirits and things like that, was something that she did not want to do. And so therefore, there was a point of time when people wanted to sort of do away with those things. But now we have come to an age where it does not have any kind of spiritual connotations. You know, we have secularized it, and we can use it without having those kind of past cultural resonances. That's one thing. But on the other hand, I think there are many words, like for instance, Pathian. You know, the word Pathian itself is from a pre-Christian tradition. Okay, so which we have incorporated as well. So I think those two processes go together quite rampantly throughout, you know, in the early colonial period.
I think you also, in a way, answered the second question, but I anyway will just read it out. So, in that process of rejection, does this mean that they were also exercising their agency to reject a part of their tradition to accept Christianity? I think you have addressed this question as well, but if you would like to add more on that.
No, so for instance, I read a report for a long time ago where Shakespeare, the superintendent at that point of time, had called a meeting of missionaries from the north and the south, and all the, you know, people who were translating the Bible, the Mizo elders. I don't remember who exactly were the Mizo elders then, but you know, the early Mizo translators for sure. And they wanted to use, they wanted, in consultation with the Mizos, they wanted to know how to translate the word soul. Okay, soul. So now we know it as kharao. Okay, but there was a discussion and debate on what shall we use for the word kharao. So, and you know, the some of the missionaries wanted to suggest mishring bull. Okay, they wanted to use the word mishring bull, and then when they consulted, they said what comes to mind when you say mishing bull, for instance, and people had different responses to that. And finally, the word hara was chosen. So words, Christian concepts like that were not something that, just came out of nowhere or just from above. It was done after a lot of consultation to know how it kind of fit in with the Mizo mind and mentality and things like that. So we can see the agency developing even in those when translations took place.
Okay. I think Professor Margaret, Professor Zama will also have something to add. We still have plenty of time.
Is it the same question
Yeah, the same question on.
about rejecting poetic
Yeah,
terms and
yes.
things like that? I'm sorry, my internet conked off just very briefly, so
Mm.
uh, I I lost out on most of what Joy was saying. But yeah, I agree, in fact, with what Joy had said, that it resonates with pre-Christianity, certain terms. So, that rejection, I guess, came in. But here, what I would like to add really is the new converts and the first converts, there were a lot of teething problems, as we know, in early Christianity in Mizoram. And although there was really no violence or killing and things like that, as we see in our history, it wasn't just absolute smooth sailing. And uh, because, see, let's be honest, the missionaries had associated our old way of life, with things that were very negative and unchristian, and maybe at times strong words also were used. So these new converts also would have loved to distance themselves from certain terms, terminology that were often used, also to be in keeping with. I hope you see it's written again, internet connectivity is unstable. Can you get me?
Yes, yes.
It's coming. So yeah.
Mm.
So to not want to be associated with what was there in the old way of life would be something that is pleasing also to the new, I would call them masters, in a way, people they looked up to. And I think this was one of the reasons. But later on, of course, it came in. And we also know when Puma's Eye and all these things, amidst the revival, the several revivals that took place, these were things that showed the resistance and also the displeasure, in a way, with many of the things that were taking place in the changes that was coming in their culture, the changes, the transformation. And we have to be honest, this had been brought on because of the definitely put into gear by the teachings of the new religion. So it was there. And that, in a way, confrontation, shall we say, through songs, especially between the new believers and those who were yet to be converted, it was very much strongly there. So it wasn't without its teething problems. And I think this was one of the parameters, this was one of the things that uh, should be, that was resultant of that. That was a result of that.
All
Yeah.
right, thank you. We still have a number of questions that we have to address, some very interesting viewpoints as well that is being shared by the participants. So, another question that is addressed to both the speakers, I will just read this out again. It has been widely argued and uncritically conceded that Christianity ushered in modernity that proved to be beneficial for us in all dimensions. Considering this convention, which has been remaining perennial for quite a while, isn't it also a high time to propagate a post colonial narrative in our discourse on identity, particularly Mizo identity, since coloniality and Christianity, though ontologically separate, are wedded together or intertwined historically? Also, given the fact that Christianity is, wait, it's a little long. Christianity is universal, but not the colonial culture and modernity that they have constructed. So I'm not sure whether you get the question or not. it's also kind of intertwined with a viewpoint. So I hope you will be able to get out something from there. Um, Considering this convention which has been remaining perennial for quite a while, isn't it also a high time to propagate a post-colonial narrative in our discourse on Mizo identity? Okay, let's focus on that.
Mm. Joy, you want to take it on first?
You go ahead first, yeah.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I get the point. Yeah. Uh, shall I answer first?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Uh, well, we are already into it. I think that was, as Rin Sani put it, it was a convoluted question, also part viewpoint of the person who asked it. So I'll try to address it. I think we are already into creating a narrative that, in a way, is different now. There was this narrative where uh, Mizo historians and thinkers, writers themselves, I would say, till today, who still like to refer to 1894 and the coming of the missionaries as though it was the beginning of Mizo history. Let's be very honest, we had our forefathers, we had, uh, our forefathers who had come down through migration, who had survived through thick and thin, and we are what we are today because of that, because of their bravery, because of the kind of culture and cultural elements that they had handed down to us. I mean, I think these are things we should not be ashamed to come up with. But while saying this, we are not actually in conflict with what Christianity or the missionaries had done for us. In fact, I would like to say the missionaries, in many ways, were the ones who wanted to us to maintain our Mizo-ness, as it were, with regard to Zolbuk and so on and so forth. We know all that story, where it was us, the Mizo population, that wanted to do away with it, and they wanted us to keep it and treasure it as a social institution and so on and so forth. So their contribution is well regarded and acknowledged. But we should not think that we were living in some dark, misty, dark age, and then suddenly the light came on. Our forefathers were involved in so much struggle to bring us to what we were when the missionaries came and what we are today. We must acknowledge that, and we should, take pride in that. So the narrative for this has already begun, I should say. But this narrative should not be where we are rejecting or downgrading the contribution of what happened in 1894 when the missionaries had come. That's all I can say with regard to this, very briefly. I think Joy might want to say something more. So,
Okay, yeah, I think Professor Zama has I think we share a similar viewpoint and with regard to that. And I just want to add that there are certain assumptions of modernity and certain assumptions of postmodernity. Okay, and the assumptions of modernity are things like um, the objectivity of truth, for instance, right? And that history progresses linearly. You know, those are some of the assumptions, and therefore. Um, uh, um, the people of the 19th century, for instance, uh, perhaps did not recognize themselves as being modern people in that sense. You know, they felt that there was an emphasis on the centrality of a single truth. There was an emphasis on people progressing in a certain direction, you know, towards civilization, from primitive to from savage or primitive to civilized. So that is some of the assumptions of modernity. The assumptions of post-modernity, of course, is that everything is relative, okay? Everything is subjective. Now, um, and I mean, I have problems with that kind of understanding as well. So so post-modernity or post-colonialism does not necessarily hold the answer as well. So I think when we adopt these kinds of meta narratives, as people like to call upon, each meta narrative has its own problems that we have to be aware of. So so I think we have to be careful when we are, because for instance, the post-colonial world today, you know, if you think about it and if we read so much about it, the world of not knowing what is truth, especially through fake news, you know, there's so much of fake news out there. This is all a part of post-modernity, you know, there's so much of conspiracy theories. If you look at the internet, we don't know, I mean, Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters and all this kinds of things that we get are a result of post-modernity as well, where people are saying that there is no such thing as truth, you know, and there is this very large gray matter that exists. So I think we need to understand the pitfalls of both kinds of meta narratives. And of course, the meta narrative that says primitive to civilized and things like that is not necessarily right as well. So we need to understand what the implications of these meta narratives are when we're trying to when we want to adopt our understanding of the past, for instance. So that's, I think, my little contribution to it.
Okay, thank you. That was a question from Anthony Lelchuan Moya. We thank you for your question. I will move on to the next question because we have a few questions lined up. Maybe, yeah, we can divide our time accordingly. This is a question by Lal Nunsa Ngaralte. Is it simply a conversion to Christianity or a whitewashed version of Christianity? As much as the faith, they also brought their culture and their sense of aesthetics. Christianity, as they preach it, has imbibed a lot of their own pre Christian cultures. So, this is a question to both the speakers.
Professor Zama, do you want to come in, Margaret?
No, you go ahead
No, you go
first. Yeah.
ahead first. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is this is a problem when we think of the two categories as two distinct categories. You know, as missionaries as a separate category and the people as a separate category, and the two interacting with one another. What I'm trying to suggest in through all of this is that there was negotiation. Okay, now and if you think of it in a sort of in a very distant sort of way, any culture that you talk about, any culture today, there is nothing like a pure culture. You know, there are accretions, there's syncretism, there's acculturation, there is all kinds of symbiosis that is taking place. So I don't think that suggesting that the missionary sort of imposition is a whitewashed imposition for all of us to, you know, when the missionaries came, there are lots of cases, there are lots of stories about how they tried to adapt to the local conditions. I'm not saying that everything that the missionaries did was right. I mean, that's not, but I'm just trying to suggest that they came at a particular period of time in our history, and we have to kind of be cognizant of that kind of a particular period and understanding. You know, that's only the thing that I'm trying to say. And so was it whitewash? Was it some? If you when you say it's whitewash, it sort of implies an imposition. You know, it implies that that it came from above. And what I've been trying to say in this in through the course of the talk was, of course, they came with what they had, the ideas they had. Okay, they came with the ideas they had. They wanted to present the gospel, which they did, but it was not received in the way they always wanted. You know, it was not received in the way they always they tried to they in the way they tried to present it, because Mizos were themselves you know, make fine tuning it in certain ways, let's put it that way. So, and you know, even today, for instance, many of the things that we know, for instance, the cultures we adopt, like for instance in Mizoram, why is Korean culture so important? Why has Korean culture become so important? It's because the Korean state has been promoting it through channels like Arirang. We think that it is our own unconscious, you know, our own sort of what do you call it, our own agency at work in trying to adopt Korean culture. No, it's the department of the Korean government that actually had programs that were meant, you know, to culturally influence people from South Asia and Southeast Asia, all of us. You know, so we are also participants in that. That is saying, and it's become so popular. So I don't think, you know, so there are these things that are taking, and you know, so the internet today is a battlefield for trying to get people's attention and ideas. Think about it. Why do people support Trump so much in Mizoram, for instance? You know, um, uh, it could be something larger at work, you know, which is trying to influence us in a particular way, in a particular direction as well. So we need to think about these things as well, you know. So it's not just the missionaries, it's all, you know, the culture that we are a part of is a culture that is trying to dominate us, you know. So we I think we need to bear that in mind as well.
I'll just add something more there. From what I have read, it wasn't that the missionaries were in cahoots with the British administrators or vice versa. There were times when they were at loggerheads. We know all about that. We have read it. So it wasn't something where they joined hands to bring in a kind of whitewashed Christianity per se. But I just briefly want to say that the missionaries who came, let us not forget the context in which they came, the historical context in which they came. From where did they come? What was the formation of their thoughts and attitudes? You know, the white man's burden, as it was very much with them. So, you know, they brought along all that, what I would call that baggage, but it was done with so much missionaries. However, at times being surely they would have also failed at times or been like or worse than the administrators also at times, maybe in their attitudes and in their speech. But whatever they did, they felt they were doing it for a cause, that is for the spreading of the gospel. So we'll give them that credit. But we must not forget that they were molded from a culture that, you know, truly believed in the superiority of their race. So when they came, Christianity, although we say it wasn't an imposition, let's be honest, I doubt if people were really given a choice in the sense that we were fortunate, the Mizos, at least I would say the white man was fortunate that there had been no established majoritarian religion as yet, like Hinduism, Buddhism, nothing had been established here as yet. So it was like virgin territory for them, and it came easy, although, as I said, there were some small teething problems along the way. But I would think that for people who lived during those times also, they did see, sometimes they did see them as one, you know, as one and the same. So that is why, to go back to that previous question that we had answered, it's good that we should do research and we should talk about starting these narratives, encouraging these narratives, where was the Christianity also tinged with politics? You know, the politics of religion. How can we say it wasn't? So I think these are things which need to be looked in also. Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, can I just add something? Which is also, I think, you know, the missionary presence was, how many years was it? 80, almost 100 years, huh? In Mizoram, like so there is a tendency to kind of think of this period as one period, one homogeneous period. And I think we need to recognize that different missionaries had different perspectives to the whole, to the situation in Mizoram, in the Lushai Hills, or for that matter, any other place. So, in our understanding of the missionary presence, we need to nuance it as well. So, there could be missionaries who, especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century, who were more conservative perhaps, but by the time that we come to the 1950s, 1960s, it's a different, much more reflexive kind of missionary who comes into the Lushai Hills. Okay, so we need to recognize that there's a century almost of missionary intervention, and the missionary attitudes to people changes over time. The missionary understanding of things change over time, and it's very different. I think we need to read our sources much better. If you read sources, like if you read Pumena's letters, for instance, Pumendas's works, or even later works like like Mr. Edwards and things like that, it's a different perspective to the people, to how they should engage with the people. So I think we need to understand that as well. And I was just reminded of an incident actually in the South Lushai Hills, where Edith Chapman, so she was asked to be the head of the mission field when some of the male missionaries were not there. Okay, and their families had gone on furlough, and the Mizo Rangupa in that place did not like the fact that a woman was being made the head of the mission for that period. So she had written letters saying that they threw stones at her house, and things, and the corrugated iron sheets and things like that. So there were stones that were pelted at her house and things. So what I'm trying to suggest is therefore that um, people's acceptance of the faith was not without these kinds of negotiations, was not without these kinds of agency that was being, and even missionaries themselves like that had to face the brunt. We think that they were like, people regarded them as demigods or whatever, but they faced the brunt of people's anger as well on several occasions. So all that I'm trying to say is that the missionary sort of presence has to be understood in a much more nuanced manner, because each one had it, and it's a long period, different kinds of takes on different kinds of situations.
Okay, thank you so much for the answers. I'll just move on to this next question, which is also rather long. I hope I make sense as I read it. This is a question from Lalrin Pui, and she's asking, do you think that the Mizo society suffers from a kind of sociological anomie or a psychological trauma from the deliberate imposition of the English language by resorting to physical punishments or other penalties for divine schools vis-a-vis missionary schools? Okay, that's the question. She's addressing about the imposition of the English language in schools, and using any other language, maybe the local language, which maybe resort to kind of physical punishments on the side of the teachers towards the students. So therefore, she's asking, do you think that the Mizo society suffers from this kind of psychological trauma because of the deliberate imposition of the English language, which is first practiced in schools? Yeah.
If I can just answer that briefly, uh, maybe that could have been also a contributing factor, but I don't think it would be, the main reason. If we are implying that this, due to this, we are afraid of English, or we don't want to speak English, or we don't want to use it, if we are implying that, I don't think that that would be the major reason. But I understand where the question is coming from. We have heard and seen, in our own schools also, where not only Mizo, but using your own mother tongue, language other than English during a period of time and things like that was not permitted, and you were punished or you were given minus marks from your team. These are common practices, have been common practices, and I don't know how far and how rigorously, or maybe even more rigorously with physical punishment as implied. So I don't really know if fear of a language arises out of that, but in children, young children, perhaps some trauma would be there with regard especially to the physical punishment aspect. But as we grow into adults, so many other, things come into our life, so many other influences enter into our lives, into our way of thinking, uh, which forms our opinions, our way of thinking, and so on and so forth. So I think with time, I wouldn't think, I don't know if this would be a lasting kind of trauma. It would also be that if at a personal level somebody has really suffered something physical so as to bring on a trauma that lasts a lifetime, that would be another matter. But otherwise, I wouldn't hold it as one of the main reasons or anything like that of our fear of English. And if we are going to go into our fear of English or reluctance to use English in our, I think it would involve a much more wider discussion. Mm.
Okay, ma'am, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I was told that English medium schools came into Mizoram only in the 1980s. So I think, the person is not speaking about the earlier period, because prior to that, it was all in Mizo medium in any case, right? In Mizoram, it's only after the 1980s that English medium sort of gains popularity in Mizoram. So, yeah, as Professor Zama has said, I mean, there might be individuals who are so traumatized that they can't speak. There might be individuals. But as a society, I don't know whether, we have to think about how rigorous it has been, how rigorously it has been imposed throughout society, and that would be difficult to answer. But like for instance, in Delhi, also in Delhi schools, for instance, fines are imposed. And Hindi is gaining a lot of popularity in the schools in Delhi, even in English medium schools, and lots of people. So schools also have to impose things like fines and stuff like that. So I don't know whether you can attribute, whether you can say they have been traumatized in places like Delhi as a community. So yeah, I don't know. One can't really answer it as a collective. Maybe as individuals, there have been individuals,
Okay, thank you. I hope that is clear to the participant who had asked the question. We have one participant, Vanlutla Narendle, who would like to ask the question himself. So I have unmuted him. I hope he can hear us. Vanlutla
Yes, I
Narendle,
can hear you. Yes,
please,
I can
yeah,
hear you. Am I audible?
yes, you are audible. Can you
Okay,
please
thank you
pose
so
your
much,
question?
host. Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, host, for giving me the time. And first of all, I would like to commend and appreciate with my highest appreciation to our presenters, Madam Margaret and Madam Joy, for their lucid and clear presentation. And it was well channeled to us, I believe. And I would like to shout out, well, let me introduce myself first. I'm joining you all the way from Shillong, Meghalaya. I got an invite from the would-be presenter for tomorrow through link. So I joined you all the way from Shillong, and I'm here in Shillong for my work. And I'm not an English student as such. So just my interest, because of my interest, I'm joining. Well,
You're most welcome.
Well, first of all, I want to our host for pronouncing my play instead of Anatana. That sometimes is, we try to make it anglicized pronunciation of our music. It's a bit disturbing to the. Well, my first question. I totally agree when she said language is dynamic, not static. Yes, I totally agree with you, madam. Uh, but my question here is, when we say language is dynamic, not static, and we have to be welcome to the changes in our languages, up to the extent of welcoming the foreign languages to our languages. Yes, I do agree with you on that matter. Uh, on one hand, we can say that Mizo is being one of the endangered languages. We empathize uh, with the activists who want to make sure that our language is not dying away. But on the other hand, according to the law of nature, according to our reality we face today, um, uh, we want to preserve our language. And on the other hand, we cannot uh, escape from the fact that, yes, these other languages are also creeping in our language. So my question is, where do we draw the line? Which language, which terminologies, which to adopt in our language, but which ones to throw away from language? For instance, we have computer, and we feel easy to use the term computer, where in Mizo term we can use call Tloknei. So we actually draw the line, use where to incorporate or adopt the language of others. Like for instance, if not only English, it's not only the case of English, we also have like Hindi, where I believe Chini is also Hindi term, where we have already adopted. So where do we really draw the line, bearing in to preserve our language in the meantime, to the other languages that are creeping inside in our language? That's my first question. And again, my biology, I have done many things to add up to have been discussed regarding missionaries coming in and whether they really know our culture. I have many things to, but like I've said, uh, just posing to that. So my question is, where do we draw the line in preserve, or we any other language? Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Wanlatlan, for your question. In fact, it's a question I would love to answer. Where do we draw the line? With regard to language, yes, it is dynamic. It is something that has to grow and be enriched. I think we Mizos are very fortunate in a way that our language, it is said that Mizo language is a tonal language, right? Excuse me, it's a tonal language. Although our vocabulary may be small, let's say, but it is the tones, the intonations we add to even a single word with double adverbs and so on and so forth that give meaning, So I won't go into too much examples on that, but I think you understand. So we are fortunate. Where do we draw the line? Simply is, see, I'm very much in support of preserving the purity of our language insofar as it should not be corrupted. Now, what do I mean by this? Like nowadays, because of excuse me, because of the our constant use of the social media, the manner in which we send text to each other, the way we truncate our words, frankly, sometimes I have a hard time reading certain messages sent to me by some people. It's I cannot read it, and it sounds like some other strange language when actually they're writing in Mizo. I think this is what I call corrupting the language, the purity of the language. As far as I'm concerned, we must use, of course, as a teacher of literature, I obviously would insist on it, proper spelling, proper punctuation, and accepted abbreviations, whether it's in English or in Mizo. Now, so when I say that I'm in support, but I was referring, and you were referring to words like computer, and then the proposed Mizo replacement, and so on. One of the Mizo words, that has come to stay, I hope, which I really like and I find so appropriate, is Tonshiat, that is with regard to experiences, Tonshiat. Like, the more you think of it, it is so appropriate. It tells you everything about what experiences are supposed to be, past and present. So things like that. But these things in language, especially the sociolinguist, which I'm not, the sociolinguist would tell you that a lot depends on usage. So even with the list of names, list of words, new words that many language activists have brought up and taken so much trouble, I have been through them and I feel that they are so good and appropriate. But how are we to use it? Can these things suddenly be used appropriate suddenly? Can now, who are the people who are going to tell the public, if you are going to write an article or a story or whatever using these kind of new words that are being brought in Mizo to enrich the vocabulary, it will have to come with footnotes for a long time, because many of us are not going to understand what it means, and whether it will stick and be accepted by the speakers, by the Mizo people, it will take time. It will have to be with usage. The acceptance will have to come with usage, and it will have to spread out to the common speakers. I mean, those of us who use it every day. So in that sense, where do we draw the line? I don't think there is any rigid line, but with regard to language, preserving the purity of Mizo language, as I said, definitely I feel that we must avoid corrupting our language. Nowadays, we read so much in the articles also. There are people who really feel so strongly, and I'm very much one with them when regarding pronunciation, forget about, the spelling through text, regarding pronunciation, the kind of, the ways in which our normal usage of everyday Mizo words are being pronounced. And I'm sorry to say, but most of these culprits happen to be from, the Thalai or the young crowd, because this is the way, I guess, they speak. Uh, it's cultivated, I would say, to show a kind of, I don't want to analyze anyone here, but to be a part of a crowd, or of a certain generation, I guess, you even pronounce the Mizo words in a certain way, which is just not right. I won't go into the nitty-gritty here, but I think you understand what are those words. They come often enough in the papers. We read about it in the papers. So I would draw the line there also. When it is Mizo and we are speaking Mizo, let us speak it correctly. Let us write it correctly. And but now what about foreign words or loan words? As we were pointing out with chauka, kitchen, there are a number of words that we have begun to use because it is convenient and because we don't have a matching word in Mizo. So one could go on with, some list that has entered into Mizo language, particularly from Hindi, surprisingly. And we have accepted it, we use it. And nobody is complaining that these words have corrupted or made impure the Mizo language. So, when I talk about time and acceptance and usage, this is what I mean. But language is dynamic, it has to grow, it will come, it will happen, and it is happening. But I do know that people, uh, especially stalwarts writers and thinkers in our Mizo community, a number of them are very unhappy with things like it happens from the pulpit in church, from the pastors themselves, or with the radio maybe, or on TV also, the manner in which Mizo is used. That is, they say that somebody cannot even speak a line of pure Mizo. They have to start mixing it up, bringing in an English word here, bringing in an English word there, which is true. I have noticed this also. When it is quite possible, to say the whole thing in Mizo, unless it is a technical term or something like that, a medical term or a technical term, it is possible. And also me, I've been very conscious of this. And I've tried to also be aware of this, because it could be something we should keep in mind. That is not to do with loan language, borrowing language and things like that. It is mixing up. But then we also hear of things like Hinglish, for example, mixture of English and Hindi, for example. And then in America, for example, there are so many hyphenated identities. So also so many hyphenated languages, Chinese American or Indian American, or, things like that, where even when it is spoken, you are actually roping in words from your own vernacular or your own language. And I think Mizos, when we speak English also, we do it. It is not only when we speak Mizo that we do it, but we do it when we speak Mizo also. Maybe people can be more conscious of this, but I think this is one area that can be debated. Now, however, there is also a similar area which I can speak in this connection on is bilingualism. Like, for example, today I was so sorely tempted to move into Mizo sometimes, or to add a line here or there in Mizo, but then I know that the listeners, and later on when it is on YouTube and it will be listened to, hopefully by people outside us, they wouldn't understand. So, bilingualism, I don't see the harm. Like when you are speaking in Mizo and then you want to add another sentence, you code switch, you move from one language to the other, and because you feel competent and confident in both the languages, these things will happen. It is happening, you cannot stop it. It is happening, you cannot stop it. So where do we draw the line? I think is not something where we draw a rigid line, but with regard to corrupting the language through our spellings or mispronunciations. And mind you, mispronunciations not by a non-Mizo speaker, but a Mizo speaker, that even sometimes I also feel offended. But otherwise, other things, like the entry of loan words, and bilingualism at times, especially in informal speeches, these things will happen. But when you speak, either from the pulpit or you are speaking at some important gathering, and you cannot speak a full sentence in Mizo, or you cannot speak a full sentence in English without bringing in some Mizo word or the other. This is not bilingualism, by the way. This is, a kind of interpolation, which for now is quite unacceptable because it distracts and it dilutes the language you are using. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you so much, madam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, add on that. Ma'am, Professor Joy, do you have anything to add on that? Okay. All right. So I would not like to tire our resource persons too much. I think we have had a very fruitful and long session. Um, okay, there are some participants who, have been unmuting their videos, so it's a little disturbing. I would just like to request all the participants, like those who are willing to join us again tomorrow and the next day, please make sure your videos are muted, your audio is muted, so that the resource persons are not troubled and are not disturbed. So I would just like to end our session. How privileged I feel is beyond what I can express in words today. It was pure joy to listen to two of the most, if not the most, prominent Mizo academics. I'm sure their talk has opened our eyes to many corners unexplored. I am certain that it would definitely benefit the participants, especially those academically inclined. As I've already mentioned in the beginning of our session. Feedback link will be available, but in order to avoid confusion, this feedback link will be made available only at the end of all the sessions, after completing all the sessions at the end of our session on the 25th. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for staying with us till now, the participants, and I would also like to invite you once again for tomorrow's session, which is going to be on English as a second language in contemporary Mizo society. And once again, we are going to have speakers like Adam Sabrin Sanga, who is currently the editor of the Frontier Dispatch, and another famous speaker, Shiata Tsangte. I think we all know him. So they are both so passionate and already so pumped to be having a session with us. So once again, I would like to convey my thankfulness to both our resource persons today. If you, both of you still have something to add, we can still open the time.
Well, I just want to say that I'm very happy to have been part of this discussion, and I mean, it's not very often that personally me, to be able to interact with such a large audience. So I just want to thank you for giving me the privilege to be part of this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you both so much for delivering such enlightening talk for all of us. Professor Margaret, would you like to
Yes.
say anything?
Yes, I would again, like Joy, also would like to say a big thank you to all the participants, and of course to you, Rinchan, and to your college for organizing this on a topic, as you said, today the COVID-19 is on everybody's mind. But I hope today's topic is has given us a chance to think about some other things as well. And it's been wonderful, except that I suffered from a small break in the internet which disturbed my participation otherwise. And I think we thank the participants for their questions, which were very enriching for us as well. And of course, I want to thank Joy Patel. She's what I would call a true academician, always so well read and so proper in her approach. We have a lot of things to learn from her, from you, Joy. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Exactly, ma'am. Thank you all so much. Please join us again tomorrow. And I guarantee that we will also be hearing from both our speakers today again in the discussion session tomorrow. They will be with us throughout our sessions for the 3 days. And you might also still have the privilege of asking questions directly to them again tomorrow and the day after. Okay, so thank you all. I will now
Okay.
end our session
Thank you.
today. Thank you very much.